Oh, this is a review of Chapter 10 from Evolve Your Brain by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And the title is Taking Control, the Frontal Lobe in Thought and in Action. So we've got a Kindle reader open on desktop version. You can see me in the corner. So I'm going to attempt to go through the notes I've highlighted, and yeah, we can reflect with each other and really understand and have a conversation to really ram home our understanding of what Dr. Joe is discussing here, and maybe create those aha moments in our brains. And yeah, the main thing, the reason for this video is to help me sort of talk to myself through this medium. And yeah, maybe it can help other people watching this video. And yeah, feel free to comment below, send it to your friends. Would be grateful if you subscribed. And yeah, so we'll see how it goes as we go along. But it's going to be a very open discussion. I've got no scripts. I've highlighted lots of notes from the chapter. I'll read through it maybe, and then sort of give my feedback and maybe stop and reflect on where it feels necessary to do so. So yeah, we're on chapter 10. So I've already gone through the first 9 chapters. Just decided to do some videos for the last 3, 12, 13 chapters. So yeah, so it starts with what this power is, I cannot say. All I know is that it exists and it becomes available only when a man. So I'm going to mute this now because someone's walking past. So what this power is, I cannot say. All I know is that it exists and it becomes available only when a man is in that state of mind in which he knows exactly what he wants and is fully determined not to quit until he finds it. From Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell. What did he invent? Alexander Graham Bell. Yeah, I'll have to remind myself. Alexander Bell. I'm sure he's an inventor. But yeah, that's what he said. So just going through my notes here on the right side, as you can see. So I've highlighted it. Go on to the next one. So yeah, what we're basically, Alex is saying here, what this power is, I cannot say. All I know is that it exists and it becomes available only when a man is in that state of being in which he knows exactly what he wants and fully determined not to quit until he finds it. So it's not quitting, knowing what you want, driving you towards what you want, and just being in that state of mind. And it's available. It's available to everyone, every being. So it exists. Yeah. Determination, not to quit, not to be distracted. So yeah, we'll talk further about that. So next note. Okay, I wrote here. Once sincere and well-mannered, Gage was now out of control and malicious. So we're talking here about Gage, who I believe had an accident with his frontal lobe, and so Joe is discussing here the effects of the lobe damage and following behaviours. As he says here, he wants to say well-mannered, Gage was now out of control and malicious. Yeah, totally changed his way of being. I think he got, it tells a story here of Gage. Yeah, 1845, I think it was. He had an accident which affected his frontal lobe. So this gives an opportunity to see how people operated on him and observed his behavioral changes. And it seems like it is crucial in understanding how the frontal lobe interacts. Yeah, let's go to the next notes. Yeah, want to see it. Yale study conducted in the early 1930s on chimpanzees. The researchers were observing two apes who were especially aggressive and uncooperative. They were frustrated easily and tended to lash out on retaliation at other chimps. In the social structure, scientists then performed a novel type of surgery on those apes and severely infected their frontal lobes. After this surgery, both chimpanzees were easily controllable and more cooperative. So yeah, chimps were more cooperative since he had the surgery. These findings were released at a medical conference in 1935. Yeah, so the rise of the lobotomy cure. The rise of the lobotomy cure. Late 1930s, many people with psychiatric conditions are treated with medications in an attempt to reverse their antisocial personality disorder. However, meditation were quite expensive at the time. Medication was quite expensive at the time. The United States were in times of the Great Depression, but some physicians attempted to help these patients using gruesome non-medical solutions. In certain medical facilities, doctors would wait until these patients fell asleep and they got into their brain, and at windscreen wipers they messed about with their frontal lobes. Yeah, so there they would take a scalpel, slip it under the upper eyelid between the eyeball and the skull, and puncture the skull in that spot. right behind the frontal lobe. Okay, what was the effect of that? Patients underwent these treatments and exhibited many, the effects were exhibited many common traits because the after effects of the frontal lobe suggested just how the momentous role that reality, functional frontal lobe plays in our lives. I'll describe the outcome of these lobotomies in some detail. Okay, thank you. The first thing that doctors noticed was that each patient became markedly placid, lazy, lethargic, and showed no interest in their surroundings. There was a distinct loss of initiative, and these patients became uninspired, as well as they displayed a significant desire for sameness. So that was the observations after the lobotomy surgery, after they scraped away. Same radio station. Okay, they like to listen to the same radio station. Same things, do same times every day. Always craving for familiar routines. Disrupted. Didn't want to be disrupted there from their familiar. And in their habitual routine that they would not change any of their actions to produce a different outcome. Same actions producing same outcome. But they didn't want to change that. They were not willing to change. Just went to routine and familiar. These patients were so addicted to following their structures. So this is like following, just so addicted to following their structures, structured behavior, that's the rigidity. Very rigid. In their words, they could not stop putting the square peg in the round hole. Yeah, these patients also failed to gain meaning out of situations, which signified that they could not learn or memorize any new information. They could not comprehend, indicate actions for ideas. All their complex behavior patterns were replaced by simply more predictable ones. Okay, predicting onto future as also beyond their ability. Projecting into the future was also beyond their ability. So yeah, we've got a bit clear on that. It's just familiar, just trying to create a familiar, predictable future based on familiar past. If a patient broke a shoelace, it would not occurred to her to ask for a new one, she would continue to tie the shoe with a broken lace. So just using broken things, not using initiative to buy a new one. So that feels familiar, you know, when I'm sure you've known many people who just don't, just keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result, you know, using so I think there's a quote about that. Finally, they became lost in a narrow, primitive world of almost animal-like behavior. And the frontal lobe causes damage to the frontal lobe causes human beings to have one or more of the following symptoms. Damage to the frontal lobe causes, okay. We tend to become lazy, lethargic, and uninspired. We desire sameness, routine. We have difficulty focusing on single-minded tasks. We start projects or endeavors such as diet, exercise routines, and never follow through. We fail to gain meaning out of situations. In other words, we hardly ever learn anything new from situations. So that can modify our actions to produce a different outcome. We seem to have emotional outbursts when our routine world is disrupted. We do not project into the future by making any plans. Does this sound familiar? Someone you may know. Okay, let's get through there. Just give me through my notes. Yeah, same radio. You know about the same routines, damage to the frontal lobes. It's all sameness, same radios at the same time. Aggression when anything's broken, anything unknown. No planning. So if a patient broke shoelace, been through that, we understand that. And we understand finally, they became lost in a narrow, primitive world, yeah. Linnaeus gauge, back to gauge, yeah. Yeah, next one is frontal lobe. Damage to the frontal lobe causes humans to have one or more of the following symptoms. Yeah. So bring out for all symptoms. We're going to question, you know, who do we know? Do we know anyone like that? The biggest reason most people cannot utilize the frontal lobe is because we are addicted to our emotions and feelings from the body. The biggest reason most people cannot utilize the frontal lobe is because we are addicted to our emotional and feelings from the body. So addicted to the body, the feelings, the emotions, and how that feels. Therefore causing us not to using the frontal lobe as much as we could. Here's a quote: lives of quiet desperation. When Henry David Thoreau spoke of people living lives of quiet demonstration, he very well could have been speaking of our inactive and derutilized frontal lobe. Recent studies in the brain scan technology have shown that the less activity in the frontal lobe, the greater the tendency towards impulsively over emotional behaviors. Yeah. Get that. Yeah. Yeah, the frontal lobe when fully activated, gives us the capability to be much more in control of who we are, who we want to become. Then we probably realize to break free of our emotional addictions, we must put the king back on the throne, i.e. the frontal lobe. Use our frontal lobe. Our greatest gift. Quieting the storms that are our centers of perception produce in keeping us connected to our outer and inner worlds. So what we're talking about here, quieting the storms that our centers of perception produce in keeping us connected to our outer and inner worlds. Yeah, throughout evolution, we have been given remarkably gifted frontal lobes, yeah. Many images of a human brain, as well as the language we use to describe how our synapse functions. Okay, your frontal lobe senses you. Frontal lobe senses your attention. So we're doing you're doing a great selling at the frontal lobe here. So we're quieting it down, quieting the frontal lobe. We're going to center our attention. Conductor in front of your immense orchestra. It's a conductor. Frontal lobe is a conductor. It's a conductor of the orchestra. It leads by example. Yeah, so we're talking about here at the role of frontal lobe. it's only when we purposely impose our will through the use of the frontal lobe. Okay, so when we use our will, we're using our frontal lobe, that's switching on, independent of the environment. Yeah. And impose our will through the use of our frontal lobe, that we can achieve the kind of quiet and control necessary to break out of the cycle of neurological and chemical responses that dominates and dictates most of our personality, choices we make, and the reactions we set. The reactions are set in motion. Okay. Quieting down the emotional responses. It's intervening this cycle of sameness and domination of the our emotional response, our response to the environment. Just keeps us in the same cycle. Keep making the same choices. Keeps us in the same motion. Yeah, it's like we're guinea pigs on there, round and round and round and round. That same feeling. If we do not, we will not. We will be at the mercy of factors in our environment. It is only when we purposely. Right, yeah, we've been through that. Okay, the same repetitive chemical reactions that have us living in survival mode. In short, we are at the mercy. Yeah, we've been through that. Just going through my notes. The same repetitive chemical reactions that harm us living in survival mode. Human uniqueness identified. Human uniqueness identified. Okay. What distinguishes us from all the other species of animals is the size of the frontal lobe relative to the rest of our neocortex. Okay. That's it. That's what it distinguishes from all. According to this, the size of the frontal lobe compared to the rest of the neocortex. That's what separates us. Okay. Let's get some stats here. Frontal lobe, rest of the body, the cortex is about 11 to 17% in humans. However, the frontal lobe makes up 10 to 40% of the total volume of the neocortex. About 11 to 17% in humans. However, right. So go back here. So describe something else. In chimpanzees, okay, it's about 11 to 17%. In humans, it's frontal lobe makes up about 30 to 40% of the total volume in the neocortex. Okay. So that's in you get the article. If you get Kindle, you can read all these articles and these studies. It's underneath that. So that's, yeah, we understand why our uniqueness compared to other species, size of frontal lobe compared to the rest of the neocortex. It is our seat of transport. It is our seat of inspiration. What mystics have called the crown. Throne of the true self. The neocortex is the motherboard of our brain. The frontal lobes are the central processing unit, CPU. If the neocortex is the motherboard of a brain, okay, blank slate, neocortex, blank slate, the frontal lobe is the CPU, central processing unit. So it's a CPU that sits on the motherboard in that example. So, yeah. From the self. We can know and control ourselves and our future to that greater achievement can we can know and control ourselves and our future to what greater achievement can aspire. Two hemispheres and frontal lobe specialization. Because there is an element of familiarity, the brain can associate with the existing tasks based on how we have already wired the experience neurologically. Okay. So we can associate with how we've done the task in the past. So if the frontal lobe switched off, we're more likely going to just keep doing that same way, which leads to the same experiences. Association. Already wired, it's easier. It's just go into it, you know. It's like the motherboard and the CPU, it's it's already installed. You know, if we're just running the same program, we're just going to use so it's just going to it's like a computer switching on, and we're just carrying on use the same program day after day after day, rather than thinking, oh, let's try something new. And it's something, we have something there, frontal lobe, which is there saying, you know, and this is the opportunity to change the programs. So you can use frontal lobe to deprogram install new programs, inspiration to do it. It's the inspiration to do the, make that choice. Similarity, yeah. Therefore, blood flow to the frontal lobe is highest when any task is novel, right? So when we're doing a novel tasks, the blood flow is greater around the frontal lobe. And this is lowest when the task becomes familiar and have measured blood flow. Less blood flow around the frontal lobe when the task is we're doing familiar tasks that we've done before. So it's all about the blood flow. Again, blood to that frontal lobe. Let's continue by saying that the right frontal lobe is, okay, we're distinguishing right to left now. Let's continue by saying that right frontal lobe is larger than the left frontal lobe, right? Right frontal lobe is left. Okay. What we're saying is that all the information is stored in the right. All the new experiences go through the left, and everything's stored in the right. No one can say sure why that is, because scientists agree that where there is more development of structures, it stands to reason that we will have more highly evolved function. States another way, the organ that has greater development, the greater capacity to perform. Think of the difference between how our hands and our feet have developed. Our fingers are capable of performing much finer motor skills than our toes, and fingers even appear more highly refined. Numerous experiments have proven that the two sides of the frontal lobes have different independent functions. In one experiment, researchers found that this hemisphere specialization of the frontal lobe and the two halves of the brain are both correlated to novelty and routine. Novelty and routine. One side novelty, one side routine. While using PET scans, positron emission tomography scans to measure cerebral blood flow. Okay, so we've tested how blood flow between right and left. Researchers noticed that the right frontal lobe became more active than the left during unknown novel tasks, okay, and experiences. The right frontal lobe became more active. Right frontal lobe more active than the left when having novel and unknown experiences. Then everything stored and more familiar in the left. Therefore, when we are learning unknown information in an attempt to make it known, the right prefrontal cortex is mainly activated. In many ways, the frontal lobe is a lot like what we think of as our personality self. In many ways, the frontal lobe is a lot like what we think of as our personality self. It loves to learn. Right frontal lobe loves to learn new things, keep us focused, novel experiences, anything exciting, exploring, learn new skills, fun. It lights up new activities. After a few repetitions, it goes to the left. Then the right wants more of that. Right wants more new experiences, new adventures, explorations, new skills. That's the privilege of being the boss. So using metaphors, it being the boss. The frontal lobe is the boss. Lets everyone know who's the boss. It's a CEO. As long as we are inspired by a new activity or an idea, we know that this sustained focus center works extremely well. In fact, frontal lobe will often act as a whistleblower. Right. Whistleblower, so it's monitoring the rest of the neocortex to make sure everyone's doing their job, and notices when it's not. Notices when we become bored. Okay. Starts to cues it up. It starts noticing and sort of lets us know. Sort of gets our attention, and when we're distracted, it sort of gets us to pay attention. It's all about attention, focus. Our busy mind. According to some of the latest research, scientists have demonstrated that the brain processes about 400 billion bits of information every second. Usually, however, we are conscious of only about 2,000 of those bits of data. So 400 billion bits of information every second, but we're only conscious of 2,000 bits of information. 12 out of 2,000 bits. That's only 12 out of 2,000 bits. The inputs, yeah. This preoccupation ultimately causes the brain to stay busy trying to predict the next moment. So we're talking about anticipation and anticipating next moments. We can learn only when we selectively place our conscious awareness on the input and information we choose based on our free will. We can learn only when we selectively place our conscious awareness on the inputs and information we choose based on our free will. Right. It's all about conscious free will. We can only learn through that process. Our free will and attention can be our greatest gift or our biggest curse. How is that possible? We are talking about controlling the elements of our reality on which we choose to focus. It's choosing what we want to focus on rather than being told what to focus on. Choosing. More we use our free will to choose, more activated the neocortex is. The more we follow, the less blood's getting to that neocortex. Can reality be what we choose in focus? Can reality be what we choose to focus on? Can reality pose multiple options to us that we simply are attuned to? Can we sharpen our ability to use this sophisticated region of our brain so that we can selectively choose where and on what where to put our attention? Some questions there. Just as we might go to the gym, okay, as a metaphor, going to the gym and work out on, just might go to the gym and work out with a great deal of purpose and commitment. That's what they had to do. Practice and exercise those powers of concentration. So I've got going to the gym, practicing those powers of concentration, working on those muscles, concentration muscles. We can make our own brain work better. Frontal lobe's primary function, intent. A low level of activity in the frontal lobe will lead to poor control over impulsive behavior and emotions, while an overactive amygdala will lead to high levels of emotional reactions and impulsive decision making. So we're becoming aware of our amygdala and our neocortex. The amygdala is it and stimulates an emotional response. Poor control over. It's controlling our impulsive behavior and our controlling our emotion decisions based on our emotions and how our body feels. Overreacting. So yes, noticing or overreacting. Frontal lobe functions much like CEO of a business, directing the actions of all the other executives in coordinating all the separate neurological centers of the brain. Frontal lobe functions much like the CEO of a business. Okay, it's directing the traffic. Yeah, we understand that. Directing all the other executives, coordinating. Frontal lobe functions permit us to learn from our experience and decide what to do differently next time. Okay, so it's a gift. Learning from experience. making a better decision next time. In short, the frontal lobe is actively involved in creation. Who are individuals, what we want, who we want to be in, who we want to be in the future, and what kind of world we want to live in are determined how we use our frontal lobe. Who we want to be, what type of world we want to live in, where we want to live, who we want to be, what we want. It's all determined by frontal lobe. There's an expression that goes something like this. Like, our ego sometimes writes the checks and our body can't cash. Saying that usually goes something like, our ego sometimes writes the checks that our body can't cash. Well, the ego is merely the following orders from the brain let's put the failure for follow through secure squarely where it belongs. Sometimes writes the checks and the body can't cash. Our ego sometimes writes the checks that our body can't cash. We might think of our prefrontal cortex as the brain's disciplinarian, a built-in internal manager. Here's a quote: the capacity to formulate goals, to make plans for their execution, to carry them out in an effective way, to change course, and to improvise in the face of obstacles and failure, and to do so successfully in the absence of external direction or structure. So we've got an inbuilt manager who's directing traffic, who can direct us through the execution of obstacles, changing course, changing our mind, prioritizing, improving our resilience, not reliant on the external, being guided, self-guiding ourselves. When we make up our mind, about something, when we make up our mind about independent of our present circumstances, the frontal lobe experiences its greatest moment when we firmly resolve to be, do, or even have something, regardless of how long it will take or what is happening in our environment, or how the body feels at the particular moment. We spark this structure of the brain into action. So it's acting independent of the environment. Not understand that, no, independent of how long it will take, or who with, or how, or what, or why. Yes, firm intention, elevated emotion, regardless of how much money it's going to cost. Example: how do people you'll need, who you'll, all these things. What will the weather be like? How will it feel? These are questions that most people are asking before we take on a task. How will the body feel? What will the environment sort of look like? Have I got enough money? What will my hair look like? I've never done that before. I can't do that. I've done that before. And this happened. I don't want to do it again. These are sort of these are thoughts that most of us listen to, and we sort of get into these voices of, I can't do it. I've never done it before. I can't do it. I've never done before. That's like the silence of the neocortex, because that acts. It loves new experiences. The Ravens run marathons tell me, okay, so it's not our legs that run marathons, it's our mind. I've run a marathon before, and yeah, when your legs go, it's mind over matter. You believe your legs have got no energy, but you just got the intention to cross that finishing line. It's not. If you're listening to your body, when you run in front, you'll just stop. You get to that wall, but you dive into that neocortex. You remember all the training. You remember all the motivated like focus. Think of all the training ones you've been on, and you think of all the people who've run marathons before and finished it. You've done all the research, and it's just so you're using your mind to get over that finishing line, not your body. Body's gone. Get the will. Power for change. When we pray to the higher power of change in our life, aren't we just believing in our making thought more powerful than our present reality? The frontal lobe makes that happen. So it's faith, making our thoughts greater than reality. Focus and impulse control. Focus and impulse control. Okay, we're skipping through that. In this way, the frontal lobe restrains the brain from paying attention to external stimuli that don't pertain to our goals. In addition, the frontal lobe gives us the internal strength not to respond to stimuli that create feelings of immediate gratification. Instead, our frontal lobe gives us the ability to hold onto long-term dreams, ideas, purpose, and goals instead of what might be better in that moment. It restrains us from our quick knee-jerk reactions. So it's all about ideas, goals, dreams, plans, to keeping that in mind of why we're doing it, why we're doing a certain task, to undistract us from anything in the environment, what's going on in our lives. It's quietening down all that stimuli. We're just totally focused on this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. is who we want to be. It's all about the intention. Frontal lobe gives us the ability to choose what stimuli we want to pay attention to, monitoring diverse signals from external the world. Frontal lobe and focus. Even the emotional centers are cooled off in the limbic brain as a result. What we are thinking about or focusing on will become more real in our external world. Our attention is now coming to life if we are focused. It is the frontal lobe that keeps our mind from moving to associative circuits and memories that lead far from our initial thoughts processes. So it's always keeping in mind that initial thought of when we start a task. It's keeping us from that external stimuli, from where we're making associations, lowering the volume, lowering the signal to noise ratio. As discussed, however, the frontal lobe can make a conscious thought so important that in effect nothing else exists. Nothing else exists apart from what we're doing, what we've got our attention on. The disappearing world. So everything disappears. When we're doing a certain tasks, when we're reading the book, it talks about when we're reading this book or listening, everything else is silent out. All of external, the traffic, the cars, these noises. We lose everything else disappears. It's just you and the task at hand. We lose our association to the self, and we move from bringing somebody with all our identifications to being nobody. We forget ourselves, and we just forget ourselves, and then instead we literally become the thoughts we're thinking about, that natural ability that we have when our identity disappears while we're driving. Yeah, so when we're driving a car, I don't drive, but here's an example of metaphor when someone's driving 30 miles, everything. Sometimes not just forget that you're driving, because you do it so much, and everything else just disappears. When you drive again, you get an unfamiliar noise, and your brain switches on. New hope in attention deficit disorder, ADHD. So we're talking about ADHD and ADD. Many other symptoms of ADD are almost the same as the individuals with frontal lobe similarities damage from surgery or injury. Short short attention span, difficulty learning from experiences, organizational skills, a tendency to be easily distracted, low levels of planning skills, inability to focus on tasks and finish them, lack of control over actions, and tendencies so fixed that their opinions and actions that they are non-compromised self behaviors, events, even if they know what that those behaviors do not serve them. People with ADD appear normal because they can function in the it's an invisible sort of condition. Appear normal, can function with that within the routine task. Anything out of the routine, that's when it starts. Then it's when it comes to matching their attention, matching their internal representation with their behavior, focusing on novel tasks or organizing their lives. It is apparent that ADD sufferers experience serious problems. For example, almost half of hyperactive boys with untreated ADD will be arrested or felony or a felony criminal offense. Half of prison inmates have ADD. Half of prison inmates have ADD. A little over a third of ADD individuals never finish high school. A little more than half of abuse, alcohol, and drugs. And parents of ADD children get divorced at a rate of three times greater than in a non-ADD family. Their stats. ADHD affects thousands of people in the United States. Its most common traits include the inability to control their actions and maintain proper behavior in social settings. ADHD sufferers tend to act out of control in classroom situations, defy rules at home, and even take certain liberties with asking for permission. So that's ADHD. Frontal lobe and free will. One of the human attributes that most separates us from other species are free will. So our free will, our ability to determine a course of action free of the constraints imposed on animals by their biologically driven impulses. So it's our individual, it creates our individuality, our uniqueness. That's what makes us unique. The ability to choose what we want to choose. The ability to choose what we want to choose. In other words, the people who were frontal lobe impaired had difficulty in freely choosing whatever they liked. okay, that's a study about choosing from, if you have apple, oranges, Conservative, Labour, Democrats, Republicans, there's so many things where you just have one or you just have two choices. And yeah, red or blue, City or United, black or white. The world opens your mind to just these little things that the society has. Just what gives you two choices. People choosing whatever they like. So it's due. If you have frontal lobe damage, you choose what you think you should choose rather than choosing what you like, what you want, following what you think is the right choice to make. So you're choosing free will, making that choice based on what you want. This experiment, so yeah, you can read that. This experiment yielded two distinct conclusions. Frontal lobes are eminent in free will decisions making situations, especially when it is up to the individual to decide how to interpret situations in which there are more than one definitive outcome. Second, the frontal lobes are no longer. The frontal lobes are no longer critical when situations are reduced to the simple act of correct response or an incorrect response. When situations are reduced to the simple act of correct response or incorrect response, perhaps making the right decision then may not require thinking as highly evolved as making a free will decision. So it's making that free will decision, not making the right decision. What you think is the right thing to do. It's making a free will decision. Because what you think is right could be based on the past and what other people have done. Instead, we rely on, it's based on the memory-based existing machinery to become activated based on our ability to choose what we already know, instead of what's new information we can potentially learn from the frontal lobe. So yeah, it's memory-based. Most of our decisions are memory-based, what we already know, instead of making a choice and maybe learning something new. Making choices based on how we think it'll feel. Actively in the frontal lobe is to choose a familiar, routine, common, known situation. When the frontal lobe is not activated, we can respond only when we know on what is already stored. It's already stored. Yeah, just using automatic responses, mechanisms designed for immediate relief and gratification. Predictable and predictable. The ones The ones we can say we are adding to are a product of the numbing inaction of the frontal lobe. If the frontal lobe is asleep, so are we. If a frontal lobe sleeps, so are we. The frontal lobe and evolution. By giving us the ability to learn from our mistakes, the frontal lobe has been crucial to our survival and evolution as of our species. When activated, frees us from repetitive routine results, granting us the right to heightened awareness so that we can experience a different outcome. This is called survival of the species. This non-linear evolution allows us to modify our behavior and create a completely new range of experiences in just one lifetime. Yeah. Frontal lobe, on and off. So here's some pointers to understand when your frontal lobe is on and when it's off. So when it's off, these potential symptoms you may have, then intentional awareness and long attention span. Right, so this is when it's on. It is indicated when it's activated. Intentional awareness and long attention span. I'll just pick a couple out here. Adaptability, focus, strengthening sense of self, ability to make action towards goals. Okay, when it's off, listless and lazy, uninterested, devout of sameness, predictability, reactive, forgetful, follower, tends to just follow. We have simply been selecting from a prescripted menu of choices based on our past. We haven't yet begun to utilize our free will, and we have taken full advantage. We haven't taken full advantage of the gift that is our frontal lobe. Let's look next at our how it is possible to begin to utilize to a greater degree than anyone ever thought of possible. The full capabilities of our mind to continue the life we choose. There we go. So feedback on chapter 10. Open mind to the frontal lobe, and why and what the why and what of the frontal lobe. So how it'll get easier understanding of these behaviors and choices and different studies and different research. So there we go. Evolve Your Brain by Dr. Joe. I'll put where you can buy this book in the description.